Jedi, Sith, and a lot of overlapping text are just a few of the things to be found in Star Wars The Old Republic. But with the game releasing all the way back in 2011, is it still actually any good? Welcome, my name's Azadash and welcome to my first look at Star Wars The Old Republic. The first time I heard about The Old Republic was from watching a relatively long trailer entitled Deceived, published by LucasArts in 2009. Now, while theatrical trailers are common in modern times, back in the late 2000s, the level of production quality in this trailer was akin more to a feature-length film than a video game, and upon conclusion had me rushing to find out more about the game. It didn't take much searching to find out that the game was not only an RPG, but an MMORPG, and that's where my interest quickly began to fade. Not because I had some type of problem with MMOs, but as someone who at the time was both working and studying, with an understanding of the time commitment a typical MMO required, I knew I just didn't have the time to consider playing the game. Later in life I did try out a few MMOs, but I never really fell in love with the genre. While some enjoy massively multiplayer worlds and spending time with other players, I generally find myself happiest in fairly narratively focused worlds with the ability to pick up and play after a short absence, two things which are generally incompatible with the MMO genre. Now, my opinion on the genre did change a little bit when I explored Star Trek Online earlier this year, where I found that despite the game trying to sell you anything and everything, including the ability to change your own name, there was actually a decently focused plot with a distinct lack of punishment for leaving the game idle for any short period, with both of these things contributing to me having a generally favourable experience with the game. With my newfound appreciation for MMOs, I thought it would be interesting to go back and look at just how Star Wars The Old Republic was faring, and honestly my first reaction was one of surprise, with both the Steam rating of very positive and the overall player count fairly positive for a game of its vintage. It's also worth pointing out that while the game now features a free-to-play model, it initially launched as a standalone paid game with a monthly subscription required. Now, the game didn't actually last long in this original state, with it being converted to free-to-play just a year after release. Free-to-play is an interesting term, as while it's objectively true, there is an optional subscription and of course a cash shop, both things we'll get into later. As I am a player who generally prefers to focus on the narrative and single-player elements of an MMO, this review will have somewhat of a focus on these things, and while I will touch on the elements of the multiplayer, I'm not going to be covering it or the endgame in detail, so do temper your expectations if you're hoping to learn about these things. As for actually downloading the game, there are a few different ways, ranging from a dedicated EA launcher to Steam. Given I use Steam extensively, that's the option I chose. The actual launcher, once it's downloaded, doesn't sync to your Steam login, rather requiring a separate EA account to be set up. While I do appreciate games that offer a seamless sign-up experience, heading to the EA website to create an account certainly wasn't the end of the world, and in a nice touch, the game does support two-factor authentication, which in this age of cybersecurity is definitely appreciated. However, in a very strange twist, each and every time I logged into the game, it made me review and accept the EA terms of use. I honestly don't know if this is intentional or a bug. Either way, it just adds extra steps to get into the game, which is never good. Once you do get past these confirmations, the game launches and you're able to create your first character. Now, you can have up to 4 characters in the game by default, however you can pay to increase this. One of the more interesting things within the character creation is the concept of a legacy, which is basically a singular account-wide progression system which levels across all of your characters for in-universe buffs and unlocks. Essentially, it's the game's way of de-risking you creating new characters, ensuring you'll still be able to reap game-wide rewards. The first step in creating a character is determining the light or dark side alignment. This is something that can evolve throughout the game, but represents an initial choice which aligns you to a particular class. For example, the light side has Jedi, whereas the dark side has Sith. However, throughout the course of the game, this alignment can shift depending on the player's choices. There's 4 different classes for each side of the Force, with the light side having the Jedi Knight, Jedi Consular, Republic Trooper, and Smuggler, while the dark side has the Sith Warrior, Sith Inquisitor, Imperial Agent, and Bounty Hunter. Perhaps most impressively, every class not only has its own starting story arc, but vastly different progression paths throughout the game's overarching narrative, again subject to decisions that you make throughout progression. And this is one of the game's biggest selling points, the overall narrative and world building, which is excellent and far above the generally accepted standards for an MMO. There's a decision you face fairly on in the Imperial Agent class campaign, in which you need to decide how to deal with someone threatening to reveal your true identity to another character, and depending on how you handle that interaction, will alter a future plotline with another character, with them referencing how you handled it depending on your actions. And this isn't just a singular example. Across virtually all of the classes are sometimes tough decisions which will have a large impact on how the story, and by extension your character, progresses throughout the game. I'm no MMO expert, but I know enough about them to know that this isn't common, and again, it's a real standout in the overall narrative presentation. Another thing which helps the overall plot greatly is the use of extensive quality voice acting. Honestly, just about every mainline character features full voice acting, although take a listen to the default Imperial Agent voice and just tell me if you think this is what you would expect from a ruthless, dark side aligned Imperial Agent.
Secure transmission established. This is Keeper. We may speak freely, Agent. Prepare to receive your orders.
Keeper, should I be thanking you for these lovely accommodations?
Don't get cute and don't waste my time. You're here to work.
All jokes aside, the voice acting is impressive and perfectly complements the game's well-designed cutscenes. Under the free-to-play model, you get every class's starting story, plus the first few expansions, with a subscription required to unlock the more recent ones. However, whichever way you look at it, there are hundreds of hours of gameplay here without the need to subscribe, and hundreds more available with subscription. Before we continue, a massive thank you to those who support the channel. If you enjoy this type of content, please consider liking the video or subscribing to the channel. With that out of the way, let's grab a lightsaber, put out a fire, and take a look at Star Wars The Old Republic. While the actual gameplay experience does change depending on your chosen class, all of the core mechanics share common traits which remain consistent across every playthrough. The first thing worth mentioning is that for the overwhelming majority of the game, it can be completed solo, without the need to embrace the more multiplayer elements. This is achieved through a fairly deep companion system, which allows a player to have a variety of companions with them and assign various roles to them. For example, you might assign your companion role as a healer, meaning that they will focus on healing you while in combat, or if you prefer to take care of your own healing, you might assign them to be a more aggressive damage dealer. This system works really well, and there's a fair bit of customization available within the companions to ensure that you can find one that best suits your playstyle. In terms of the overall gameplay loop, it's a bit of a blend between a traditional RPG and an MMO. On one hand, there's quite a lot of fetch quests and go here and then go there quests that seem to be the staple of these games. However, the world and the characters that inhabit them are far more interesting and engaging than your typical MMO, meaning that the quests feel like far less of a chore to complete. Although this comes with one very big caveat, more on this later. The basics of the game, including camera and control, are quite good. WASD movement combined with a mouse movable camera means that control is able to be customized to any real situation, and throughout all of the time I spent with the game, I never had any issues whatsoever with these basics. There can be some challenges when in large combat areas, but honestly this is more of a reflection on the combat than it is on the control. On the topic of combat, your individual experience will vary greatly depending on your class, and your personal preferences are also going to play a very large factor into just what type of experience you have. Combat is broken up into two main types. There's close combat, which is generally a lightsaber or other melee weapon, and ranged combat, which is generally a blaster or force power. There are some exceptions to these definitions, but for the vast majority of cases they hold true. After spending some time with the game, I found that the melee combat was far more engaging than the ranged combat. There's also just a certain fun factor about swinging a lightsaber as opposed to wielding a blaster. However, perhaps more importantly, I found that the game's overall difficulty was much more forgiving with melee combat as opposed to ranged. Now, I have no doubt that you can build a late game character wielding a ranged weapon which will absolutely destroy enemies. However, in the early game, say the first 10 hours or so, there's a definite advantage in melee-focused combat. The game's overall difficulty is a complex topic to discuss. When I first started playing the game as a Jedi Knight, I was very focused on completing the main story missions, until I reached a point about an hour in where I was absolutely demolished by a mini-boss. No matter what I did in that fight, I just couldn't even come close to defeating him. So I did what every MMO wants you to do and spent an hour farming low-level enemies to raise my experience level to gain access to new abilities and equipment. Once I had leveled up my character and gained some new equipment, I was able to defeat the boss with ease and progress the story. In isolation, this doesn't sound like a big deal. However, as the game progresses, you encounter more and more of these situations which require what I would call busy work to improve the player to a point where they can progress, or use the in-game store to purchase something like an XP boost, which reduces the time spent on this busy work, and this is central to a theme that you will see throughout the game. The Old Republic doesn't necessarily require you to spend money to progress, but it does feature a variety of progression dampening mechanics which can be removed by spending money. One of the most subtle, but you can't unsee it once you see it, examples of this mechanic lies within the level design itself. Now, I want to be clear, I think the environments within the Old Republic are very good and do a great job of capturing the Star Wars universe in video game form. However, as you progress in the game, you start to notice that some of the level design is sometimes complex for the sake of being complex. I mean, take a look at this building and look at the overall design and pathing required to get from point to point. Is it immersive? Yes. Is it also needlessly complex? Also yes. What this translates to is a lot, and I mean a lot, of time spent walking from place to place to progress the game's story. Now, there are ways to shorten this time, such as mounts and fast travel. However, these are either level gated or tied to one of the game's in-game currencies. Mounts, for example, are available to free-to-play players at level 20, whereas they are available to paid subscribers immediately, regardless of level. As I said, you don't need to spend money on these things, but the game's underlying design choices continuously push the player to consider paid options to progress. As you do progress through the game, you get access to a variety of activities outside of the main story. These can be simple things like short side missions, or more complex things like entire narrative threads in new locations. I give credit to the game for mission variety. No matter your class, there's always several varied activities to complete, always available. One of the multiplayer focused activities is called Galactic Starfighter, and as a huge fan of both flight and space sims, I was really looking forward to playing this. Unfortunately, for reasons I still do not understand, I was never able to actually find a match. I could find other multiplayer activities, but just not Starfighter, which was fairly disappointing, the only silver lining being that there were so many other things to do within the game. No matter the activity or event you are doing, you'll be earning rewards. Now, these can be in the form of experience points to uplift your character's base level, or items which can be used or bound to the player. Items can be things like specific weapons or armor, or accessories. These things can be viewed in the inventory and equipped to your character. And one UI choice that I don't personally like is that when you highlight an item that's equipped and have something in your inventory that has better stats, the lower spec item stats are highlighted in green, and this just seems unusual to me, as I would expect inferior items to be highlighted red. Regardless, it doesn't take too much time to adjust to this, and the character and inventory systems all work well enough, with a more feature-rich version of both being available to be unlocked by, you guessed it, the in-game currency. And with that, it's time to talk about the game's monetization. There are two primary forms of monetization, a subscription and an in-game cash store. Firstly, the subscription. For about $15 a month, you gain access to all of the solo player content, as well as removing many critical blocks to the endgame content, such as increasing the level cap from 60 to 80 and increasing the maximum amount of the main in-game currency the player can hold. The other monetization angle is the game cash store, which is funded by cartel coins. Here you can pay for anything from a time-bound experience boost to just changing your name, with predatory pricing meaning that whatever you want, you'll always need to spend more than you actually need to. Take for example this armor set for 2,600 coins. Now you can't just buy the amount you need, which means that you either need to buy 5,500 coins or 2,400 plus 450, which equates to worse overall value, with the latter leaving over a convenient amount of coins for the even more predatory loot box purchases. I really don't like paid loot boxes in games, and honestly I think the game would be far better just removing this controversial system and sticking to a more transparent store, although I will give the game credit that unlike Star Trek Online, one of the featured items on the first page of the store is not a $500 purchase. Overall, you can definitely play a good chunk of the Old Republic without spending a dime. However, you will very frequently be reminded of the limitations in doing so, both in terms of the game's interface and UI, as well as the game's level design. The Old Republic is a generally well-presented game, despite a few curious choices and an interface which at times can feel cluttered. Graphically, the game looks pretty good for a title of its vintage, with it leaning into a more stylized graphical style as opposed to realism, which certainly aids in its aging. Environments are well detailed and really feel like destinations that you would find in the Star Wars universe, with a particular standout being the lighting and shadow effects, which really bring some of the large set pieces to life. Character design likewise, while not pushing any boundaries from a technology perspective, all look franchise appropriate, with a good amount of animation and lip sync helping to bring them to life in the game's many cutscenes. And on the topic of cutscenes, these are all really well designed and not just copy-paste camera pans, but rather thoughtfully animated displays of cinematography which really help to bridge the realism gap between the movies and the game. From an audio perspective, this is an almost flawless act. Not only does the game feature all of the familiar effects from the franchise, combined with music that wouldn't feel out of place in one of the feature films, but the voice acting, which is extensive, as in every main quest extensive, is really good, and you can tell that these are talented voice actors as opposed to simply phoned in performances.
If we don't do what we're told, Bengal Moore will kill us all.
You don't want to hurt anyone. You want to leave here peacefully.
I don't want to hurt anyone.
We should leave here peacefully.
Yes, better that way. Here, perhaps you can use these. We don't need them.
In terms of the game's main interface, it mostly works well, apart from the usual MMO trope of multiple text boxes overlapping each other from time to time. However, there is a very detailed interface editor, which lets you customize the exact heads-up display, allowing you to move or remove pretty much anything you want, except for, of course, the cash shop ads. There's no moving them. There's also options for things like auto loot, and honestly quite a lot in the way of customization to a level that I haven't seen in a game of this era before. Interestingly, while some of these options carry over to new characters when created, such as auto looting, things like the heads-up display changes don't. It's really not a problem, but it does strike me as a little unusual. Regardless, it's nearly full marks in the customization scope of the Old Republic, with it really giving the player a lot of agency as to just how they experience the game. Playing the Old Republic in modern times really comes down to answering two questions. Do you want to pay the subscription fee for the game? And if not, can you live with the multiple systems and mechanics designed to nudge you to pay the subscription? The game reminds me a lot of a casino. It's a very welcoming place with many flashing lights and seemingly happy people. However, the longer you stay there, the more you realise that you are likely to spend money and that those who already have are not necessarily always happy. That's it. That's the game. If you do love Star Wars, despite the questionable monetization system, I can pretty much guarantee you'll still enjoy the game, as when the game is at its strongest in delivering its story beats and character choices, it represents an experience that few Star Wars games have rivaled. As is so common with this genre, if you are chasing the multiplayer endgame experiences, you will need to invest a lot of either time or money. However, I will say that despite the cash shop being far from ideal, I didn't see anything in it which seemed to outright buy power. There are things which will help you reach higher power sooner, but nothing that allows you to outright pay to win, as they say. In terms of the current player count, it's difficult to judge given it uses multiple launchers, but going off the Steam launcher alone, it suggests a fairly healthy player base, combined with the fact that not only is it still in the top 100 Steam games all these years later, but the only Star Wars game in the list, suggesting that the game still has plenty of life remaining for many years to come. But that's enough from me. Do you agree or disagree with my opinions? Let me know down in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching.